The velvet room was silent. Too silent for what was about to happen. Cory Evans, the most dangerous man in the city, sat at the bar reviewing numbers with his underboss when the door upstairs exploded open. But it wasn't an enemy. It was a little boy, 5 years old, stumbling down the stairs with blood running down his face, sobbing, "They're beating my mama, please, you have to help." The entire room froze. 6 hardened criminals sat motionless. Men who had killed without hesitation didn't know what to do with a broken child standing in front of them, shaking so hard he could barely breathe. But Cory Evans moved. He walked to the boy, lowered himself to one knee, and made himself small. "What's your name?" His voice was low, steady, the voice of a man who was not afraid. "Jamie!" the boy choked out, grabbing fistfuls of Cory's expensive suit. "Jamie Bryant, please, mister. He said Mama won't wake up this time." Cory went still. "Bryant!" The name hit him like a ghost. Elena Bryant, the only woman who ever showed him kindness when he was starving on the streets 20 years ago. She fed him, gave him her coat, asked for nothing. And now her son was standing in front of him, covered in blood, begging him to save her life. "Where?" Cory asked. One word, quiet as death. "Crawford Street," Jamie sobbed. "Apartment 4B. He's been hitting her for so long. There's so much blood. Please." Cory placed one hand gently on the boy's cheek. "I'm going to get her. And the man who did this will never touch her again." When Cory rose to his feet, every man in that room felt something ancient and dangerous awaken. "We're going to Crawford Street," he said. "Leave no man standing." Apartment 4B, 4th floor. The stairwell smelled like garbage and despair. As they climbed, Cory could hear it. A man's voice shouting with rage, a woman's voice, weaker now, barely sobbing, and the awful, unmistakable sound of fists hitting flesh, his hands curled into fists. Darren Cole had been beating Elena Bryant for nearly 15 minutes. By the time Cory reached that door, she had stopped screaming. He didn't knock. He kicked the door off its hinges. Inside, Elena was curled on the floor between the couch and the wall. Blood poured from her nose and mouth. Her eye was swollen shut. One arm bent at an angle that made Cory's jaw tighten. Standing over her was Darren Cole. 6'2", thick with muscle, fist raised high and ready to come down again. "That's enough," Cory said. Darren spun around, eyes wild with drugs and alcohol. 8 men in suits blocked every exit. "Who the hell are you?" Darren spat. "Get out. This is between me and my woman." "She's not your woman," Cory said calmly. "And you made it my business when her 5-year-old son came to me covered in blood." Darren sneered. "That little brat? I'll deal with him when—" He swung at Cory. "Wild, sloppy, stupid. Before we continue, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. And if you want more powerful stories like this, hit subscribe. It helps us tell more stories that matter." Cory caught the fist mid-air. Twisted. The crack of Darren's wrist sounded like a tree branch snapping in winter. Darren screamed. Cory slammed his face into the floor hard enough to leave a dent, then looked at his men. "Hold him. We're not done." He walked to Elena and knelt beside her, his movement suddenly gentle. Impossible softness from the same man who had just shattered bone without blinking. "Elena," he said quietly. "It's Cory, the boy from the shelter. Do you remember me?" Her one working eye fluttered open. Through blood and pain, recognition slowly came. "Cory," she whispered. "Yeah." His voice cracked for just a second before he sealed it back up. "It's me. I'm here now." He leaned closer. "And I promise you, no one is ever going to hurt you or that little boy again." Bryant. The name echoed in Cory's mind like a gunshot in an empty church. He hadn't heard that name in 20 years, but he had never forgotten it. Not once. Not for a single day. The boy was still clutching his suit, still shaking, still bleeding. But Cory wasn't seeing him anymore. He was seeing something else. Someone else. Winter, 1995. Cory was 17 years old, sleeping in doorways, eating from garbage cans when he was lucky. He had been thrown out of his last foster home 3 months earlier. No family, no money, no future. Just a slow, freezing death waiting for him on the streets of a city that didn't care if he lived or died. That night, he had collapsed behind a church, too weak to walk another step. Snow was falling. His coat was torn. He remembers thinking, "This is it. This is where I die." And then she appeared. Elena Bryant. 23 years old, barely surviving herself, working double shifts at a laundromat to pay rent on a room the size of a closet. She had nothing. Less than nothing. But when she saw that starving boy curled up in the snow, she stopped. She gave him her dinner, a sandwich she had been saving for 2 days. She gave him her coat, the only warm thing she owned. She sat with him until he could stand, then walked him to a shelter and made sure they took him in. "Why?" Cory had asked her, shivering, confused. "You don't even know me." Elena had smiled, tired, sad, but real. "Because someone should," she said. "Because if we don't help each other, what's the point of any of this?" Cory never saw her again after that night. He survived. He clawed his way up from nothing, building an empire out of blood and iron and the kind of ruthlessness that made other men afraid to speak his name. But he never forgot her face. He never forgot her kindness. And he swore if he ever had the chance to repay that debt, he would burn the world down to do it. Now her son was standing in front of him, bleeding, terrified, begging for help. "Jamie," Cory said, his voice rough. "Your mother. Where is she? Tell me exactly." "Crawford Street," the boy sobbed. "Apartment 4B. Please, he's going to kill her. He said he would. He said—" "He won't." Cory's voice was ice, absolute, final. He rose to his feet slowly, and every man in that room felt the air change. This wasn't business anymore. This was something older, something deeper, the kind of debt that couldn't be measured in money, only in blood. Cory buttoned his jacket, adjusted his cuffs. His face was calm, but his eyes were burning with something his men had never seen before. He looked at Marco, then at the others. 2 words. Quiet. Deadly. "We go." 3 black SUVs tore through the city like sharks cutting through dark water. Cory sat in the back of the lead vehicle, silent, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Marco drove. No one spoke. There was nothing to say. Every man in those cars understood what was about to happen, and every man was ready for it. Crawford Street appeared through the windshield like a wound in the city. Broken streetlights, overflowing dumpsters, buildings that looked like they had given up on themselves decades ago. The apartment complex at 4B was the worst of them. 4 stories of crumbling brick and shattered windows, the kind of place where people disappeared and no one asked questions. They parked. 8 doors opened simultaneously. 8 men stepped out into the night. Cory led them inside. The stairwell smelled like piss and mold and something rotting in the walls. Graffiti covered every surface. A fluorescent light flickered overhead, buzzing like a dying insect. 2nd floor. 3rd floor. And then they heard it. A man's voice, shouting, raging, slurred with alcohol, words too muffled to understand but too vicious to mistake. A woman's voice, weaker, broken, begging. "Please, please stop! I can't!" Then a sound that made Cory's blood turn to ice, the heavy, wet thud of a fist hitting flesh. Again, and again, and again. The woman stopped begging. Cory moved faster. 4th floor, apartment 4B. The door was thin and cheap, light leaking through the cracks. The sounds were clearer now, grunting, heavy breathing, the shuffle of feet on a dirty floor. Cory nodded once at his enforcer, a massive man named Dante who had hands like sledgehammers. Dante didn't hesitate. One kick. The door exploded inward, ripping clean off its hinges and slamming against the wall inside. And there she was, Elena Bryant, crumpled on the floor between a filthy couch and a water-stained wall. Blood pooled beneath her head. Her face was barely recognizable, swollen, split, purple with bruises. One arm twisted at an angle that made Cory's stomach turn. She wasn't moving. Standing over her was Darren Cole. 6'2", 240 pounds of muscle and cheap tattoos, and the kind of cruelty that only cowards possess. His fist was raised high, ready to come down again. His knuckles were slick with her blood. For one heartbeat, no one moved. Darren's head snapped toward the doorway, his drug-glazed eyes trying to process 8 men in dark suits filling his apartment. Cory stepped forward. Slowly, deliberately. He reached up and removed his jacket, folding it once and handing it to Marco without looking. He rolled up his sleeves, exposing forearms corded with muscle and old scars. His eyes never left Darren's face. "You have 5 seconds," Cory said, his voice so calm it was almost conversational. "To get your hands off her." Darren's lip curled into a sneer. "Or what?" Cory smiled. It was the last thing Darren Cole would ever see before his world became pain. Darren Cole made the last mistake of his life. He swung. A wild, drunken haymaker aimed at Cory's jaw. The kind of punch that might have worked on a woman half his size, might have impressed his low-life friends at whatever bar he crawled out of. It didn't work on Cory Evans. Cory caught the fist mid-flight, his grip locked like a vice around Darren's knuckles still wet with Elena's blood. Then he twisted. The snap of Darren's wrist was sharp and clean, like a thick branch breaking in a storm. The bone didn't just fracture, it shattered, grinding against itself in a way that sent a scream tearing from Darren's throat. He dropped to his knees, howling, cradling his ruined hand. "Hold him," Cory said. Dante and another man grabbed Darren's arms and wrenched them behind his back, forcing him upright on his knees. Darren thrashed, cursed, spat, but he wasn't going anywhere. Cory crouched down in front of him, studying his face the way a surgeon studies a problem. "You like hitting women?" Cory asked softly. "You like making yourself feel big by breaking someone who can't fight back?" Darren's eyes were wild with pain and fear. "You don't know who I am. You don't know who I work for. Victor Soren will—" Cory's fist crashed into Darren's mouth, snapping his head back and sending teeth scattering across the floor. I wasn't finished talking. What followed was systematic, methodical. For every bruise on Elena's body, Cory delivered payment in kind. A rib for the black eye, a shattered kneecap for the split lip, broken fingers, one by one, for the arm she might never use properly again. Darren screamed until his voice gave out. Then he just whimpered, choking on blood and snot, and the kind of fear he had only ever seen in his victims. By the end, he was barely conscious, a broken, bleeding heap held upright only by the men gripping his arms. Cory stood over him, breathing steady, knuckles split and dripping. "Take him," he said to his men. "We're not done with him yet." They dragged Darren out like garbage. Then the room went quiet. Cory turned to Elena. She hadn't moved. Her breathing was shallow, ragged, but she was breathing. Alive. Barely. He walked to her slowly, lowering himself to his knees beside her broken body. His hands, the same hands that had just delivered devastation, hovered over her with impossible gentleness, afraid to cause more pain. "Elena," he said softly, "can you hear me?" Her one working eye fluttered open, glassy, unfocused, but aware. "See, Cory," her voice was barely a whisper, wet with blood. "Yeah," his throat tightened. "It's me. I'm here." A tear slipped from her swollen eye. Cory leaned closer, his voice the gentlest thing in that ruined apartment. "You're safe now. I'm taking you somewhere he can't follow. Somewhere no one will ever hurt you again." He paused. "I promise." For the first time in 20 years, Elena Bryant let herself believe someone. The doctor's office had no sign, no address in any directory. It existed in the back of a warehouse Cory owned, and the man who ran it, Dr. Marcus Chen, had been patching up Cory's men for 15 years without asking questions. Tonight, he worked on Elena. Cory stood outside the room, arms crossed, watching through a window as Chen stitched the gash above her eye. Jamie sat beside him on a metal chair, small legs dangling, his mother's blood still dried on his shirt. The boy hadn't let go of Cory's hand since they arrived. 2 hours later, Chen emerged. 3 broken ribs, fractured cheekbone. Her left arm has a hairline fracture. She's lucky it wasn't worse. Internal bruising, but no organ damage. He paused. "She'll recover. But another 10 minutes in that apartment, and we'd be having a different conversation." Cory nodded once. "Can I see her?" "She's asking for you." The room was small and clinical, lit by harsh fluorescent lights. Elena lay on the bed, her face a patchwork of bandages and bruises. But her one working eye was open, and when Cory walked in, something in it flickered. Relief and fear. Not fear of him. Fear of something else. "Jamie?" she whispered. "He's safe. He's right outside." Elena exhaled, tears slipping down her swollen cheeks. "Thank you. Cory, I don't know how to—" "Don't." His voice was firm, but kind. "You don't owe me anything. You never did." She shook her head weakly. "You don't understand. This isn't over. Darren, he's not the problem." Cory went still. "What do you mean?" Elena's voice cracked as she spoke, the words tumbling out between broken breaths. "Darren owes money, a lot of money. $200,000 to a man named Victor Soren. He borrowed it for drugs, for gambling, for God knows what. When he couldn't pay," she swallowed hard. "Victor told him he could work it off. But Darren kept failing, kept losing. So Victor demanded collateral." Cory's jaw tightened. "What collateral?" Elena's eye met his. "Me and Jamie." The words hit Cory like a sledgehammer to the chest. "Victor said if Darren doesn't pay by the end of the month, he takes us, sells us. I don't know where, I don't know to who, but—" Her voice broke completely. "He said Jamie would bring a good price. My baby. My little boy." Cory didn't move. Didn't breathe. The silence in that room was absolute. "Cory." Elena reached for his hand, her grip weak but desperate. "Killing Darren won't stop this. Victor will still come. He'll come for me. He'll come for Jamie. We're not people to him. We're product." Cory looked down at her hand in his. Then he looked up. His eyes had changed. Something cold and ancient had settled behind them. The kind of resolve that burns cities and topples empires. "Victor Soren," he said quietly, "has no idea what's coming for him." The apartment was on the top floor of a building Cory owned in the heart of his territory. Steel door, bulletproof windows, 2 armed guards in the hallway, rotating every 8 hours. No one got in without Cory knowing. Elena slept for the first 2 days. Her body needed it. The kind of deep, desperate sleep that comes after trauma, when the mind finally feels safe enough to shut down and heal. Jamie didn't sleep much at all. The boy wandered the apartment like a ghost, too afraid to settle, too exhausted to cry anymore. He ate when food was put in front of him. He answered questions with nods or shakes of his head. But his eyes, those wide, haunted eyes, followed Cory everywhere. On the 3rd day, Cory came to check on them and found Jamie sitting by the window, a piece of paper and some crayons spread out in front of him. The boy looked up when Cory entered, and something shifted in his face. "Are you staying?" Jamie asked. Cory hesitated. "For a little while? Can you sit with me?" Every instinct in Cory's body told him to say no. He wasn't built for this. He didn't know how to be soft, how to comfort, how to be anything other than the monster that kept other monsters at bay. But the boy was looking at him with those eyes. Cory sat. After that, something changed. Jamie started following him. Not constantly, but whenever Cory came to the apartment, the boy would appear at his side like a small, silent shadow. He asked questions, simple ones at first. "What's your favorite color? Do you have a dog? Why do you wear suits all the time?" Cory answered awkwardly, unused to conversation that didn't involve threats or negotiations. But he answered. Then came the drawings. The first one appeared on the kitchen counter, a crayon picture of a tall figure in black standing next to a small figure with brown hair. "That's you and me," Jamie explained seriously. "You're protecting me from the bad guys." Cory didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. But he folded the drawing carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. More drawings followed. Every visit, a new one. Cory fighting monsters. Cory with a cape. Cory and Jamie and Elena eating dinner together like a family. That one made Cory's chest hurt in a way he didn't understand. Elena watched all of this from her bed, then from the couch as she grew stronger. She saw how her son looked at this dangerous man. With trust, with hope, with the kind of desperate attachment that only forms when a child has been saved from the abyss. And she saw how Cory looked back. Uncomfortable, uncertain, but unable to pull away. "He's never had anyone," Elena said softly one evening while Jamie slept. "No father, no one who made him feel safe." Cory stared at the latest drawing in his hands. "I don't know how to be that," he admitted. Elena smiled weakly. "You already are." The message arrived 3 days later. One of Cory's men found it at Elena's old apartment on Crawford Street, a place Cory had ordered watched in case Victor made a move. He made one, a dead rat, bloated and rotting, nailed to the door with a rusty spike. Beneath it, a note written in black marker on stained cardboard. "Debts don't disappear. Neither do witnesses." Cory stared at the photograph Marco had taken, his face carved from stone. "He knows," Marco said, standing across from Cory's desk in the back office of the Velvet Room. "He knows you took them, and he's not going to let it go." Cory said nothing. Marco pressed on, his voice careful but urgent. "Victor Sorin controls the entire East Side. He's got connections to the Bratva, suppliers from overseas, and enough soldiers to make this very bloody, very fast." He paused. "Boss, I've been with you for 12 years. I've never questioned you, but I'm questioning you now." Cory's eyes lifted. Cold. Waiting. "We're risking a war," Marco said. "Not over territory, not over money, over a woman and a kid." He exhaled hard. "Is she worth it?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Cory didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into the top drawer of his desk and pulled out a piece of paper. Folded, creased, handled so many times the edges were soft. He unfolded it slowly. A crayon drawing. Bright colors, clumsy lines, the unmistakable work of a 5-year-old. 3 figures standing together in front of a house, a woman with long hair, a small boy with a big smile, and a tall man in a black suit standing between them like a shield. Above the tall man, in wobbly letters, Jamie had written 2 words. Uncle Cory. Cory stared at that drawing for a long moment. His jaw tightened. Something moved behind his eyes. Something human, something he had buried so deep he thought it was dead. Marco watched, waiting. Finally, Cory looked up. 20 years ago, he said quietly, I was nothing. Less than nothing. I was dying in the snow and the whole world walked past me like I was garbage. His voice hardened. One person stopped. One person gave me everything she had, her food, her coat, her kindness, when she had nothing herself. He set the drawing on the desk, smoothing it flat with his fingers. Her son ran into my bar covered in blood, begging me to save his mother. He trusted me. A 5-year-old boy looked at me, at what I am, and he trusted me. Cory's eyes met Marco's, and there was no doubt in them. No hesitation. Only certainty. Victor Sorin nailed a dead rat to a door and threatened to take them, to sell them. He stood slowly. You asked if she's worth it. Cory picked up the drawing and looked at it one more time. Yes, he said. She's worth everything. The meeting was called for midnight. Cory's captains gathered in the basement of the Velvet Room. 8 men who controlled different pieces of the Evans empire. Drugs, guns, protection, real estate. Each one had killed for Cory. Each one had grown rich under his leadership. And each one knew that when Cory called a meeting like this, something big was coming. They sat around a long table, the air thick with cigar smoke and tension. Cory stood at the head, his hands resting on the wood, his eyes moving from face to face. No one spoke. They knew better. Victor Sorin, Cory began, his voice low and even, has made a mistake. The name rippled through the room. Everyone knew Victor, the Russian who ran the East Side, who had ties to traffickers overseas, who had built his empire on human misery. 3 days ago, he sent a message to a woman under my protection, a threat against her and her 5-year-old son. Cory's jaw tightened. He believes they belong to him, collateral for a debt they didn't owe. One of the captains, a heavyset man named Sal, shifted in his chair. Boss, Victor's got serious firepower. Starting something with him. I'm not asking permission. The words cut through the room like a blade. Cory straightened, his eyes cold and absolute. The Bryant family is under my protection. Anyone who touches them, anyone who even looks at them wrong, answers to me. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Victor Sorin thinks he can threaten a child, and I'll back down. He thinks I'll calculate the cost and decide it's not worth the blood. A dangerous smile crossed Cory's face. He's wrong. He looked around the table, meeting each man's eyes. We're going to show Victor Sorin what it costs to threaten what's mine. We hit his shipments, we hit his warehouses, we hit his men. His voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. And we don't stop until he understands that some debts can't be collected. Silence. Then Marco spoke, his voice steady. When do we start? Tonight. The war began before sunrise. The first shipment was hijacked on the highway. 2 trucks carrying product worth $500,000, intercepted by masked men who left the drivers bound and gagged on the side of the road. The cargo was burned. The second night, one of Victor's warehouses caught fire. By the time the flames were out, everything inside was ash. The third night, Victor's men started disappearing, one by one. A soldier here, a lieutenant there. They would leave their homes and never arrive at their destinations. No bodies, no messages, just absence, the kind of silence that screamed louder than any threat. By the end of the week, Victor Sorin's operation was bleeding from a dozen wounds. And everyone in the city knew why. Cory Evans had declared war, not for territory, not for money, for a woman who once showed him kindness, and a little boy who called him uncle. The war lasted 3 weeks. It felt longer to Victor Sorin. Cory didn't fight like other men. He didn't charge in with guns blazing, didn't make dramatic moves that could be countered. He fought like a surgeon, precise, methodical, utterly without mercy. First, the shipments. Every truck Victor sent out was intercepted. Product worth millions vanished into the night, leaving nothing but empty vehicles and terrified drivers who quit the next day. Then, the money. Victor woke one morning to find his accounts frozen. Every shell company, every offshore fund, every hidden stash. Someone had talked to the right people, paid the right bribes, pulled the right strings. Overnight, Victor Sorin went from wealthy to desperate. Then, the men. His lieutenants were given a choice. Leave the city tonight or don't leave at all. Most chose wisely. The ones who didn't were found in alleys, in dumpsters, in shallow graves outside the city limits. No witnesses. No evidence. Just bodies and a message written in blood. By the end of the third week, Victor Sorin had nothing left. No soldiers, no money, no allies. He sat alone in his office on the top floor of a building he no longer controlled, staring at the door, waiting for what he knew was coming. The door opened at midnight. Cory walked in alone. No guards, no guns drawn. Just a man in a black suit, stepping into the room like he owned it. Because now, he did. Victor didn't stand. He couldn't. His hands were shaking too badly. "You know why I'm here," Cory said. Victor's voice was hoarse, broken. "You destroyed everything. Over a woman. Over a child." "Yes." "They weren't worth this. They were nothing. Collateral. You've burned down an empire for someone who matters." Cory's voice was ice. "Something you never understood." He walked closer, stopping just a few feet from Victor's desk. The Russian looked up at him. This man who had dismantled his entire world in 21 days, and saw nothing but cold certainty. "I'm going to give you one chance," Cory said quietly. "One. Because killing you would be easy, and I want you to live with what you've lost." Victor's eyes flickered with desperate hope. "Leave," Cory said. "Tonight. Get in your car, drive to the airport, and disappear. I don't care where you go. Europe, Asia, the bottom of the ocean. But if you ever set foot in this city again, if you ever speak Elena's name or Jamie's name, if I even hear a rumor that you're thinking about them—" He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I will find you. And what I did to your empire will look like mercy compared to what I'll do to you." Silence. Victor's hands trembled. His eyes were wet. Everything he had built, everything he had been, gone. "Do we understand each other?" Cory asked. Victor nodded. "Once. Broken." "Good." Cory turned and walked out without looking back. By sunrise, Victor Sorin was gone. He never returned. 1 year to the day. Cory remembered it perfectly. The door exploding open, the bleeding boy stumbling down the stairs, those desperate words that changed everything. "They're beating my mama! Please help!" 365 days later, the world looked very different. Elena's trattoria sat on a quiet corner in the nicest part of Cory's territory. White tablecloths, candles in wine bottles, the smell of fresh pasta and garlic bread drifting through the door. It had been a failing restaurant when Cory bought it. Now it was the most popular Italian spot in the city, with a 3-week waiting list. Elena ran it. Not as a favor, not as charity. She had earned it, working 18-hour days to learn the business, hiring staff, building something real. The restaurant was hers in every way that mattered, and she had never been prouder of anything in her life. She was healing, stronger every day. The bruises had faded long ago, but more importantly, the fear in her eyes had faded too. And Jamie was thriving. First grade, straight A's, a best friend named Marcus who came over for sleepovers, a soccer team where he played midfielder, running up and down the field with a smile so big it made Elena cry every time she watched. He still had nightmares sometimes. He probably always would. But he also had something he'd never had before. Safety, stability, family. Every Sunday, without fail, the three of them had dinner together. Tonight was no different. The private back room of Elena's trattoria was warm and golden, filled with the smell of homemade lasagna and the sound of Jamie's laughter as he told Cory about his week. The spelling test he aced, the goal he almost scored, the joke his friend told that was so funny milk came out of his nose. Cory listened to every word. When dinner was finished and the plates were cleared, Jamie reached under his chair and pulled out a piece of paper, folded carefully in half. "I made this for you," he said, suddenly shy. "For the anniversary." Cory took the paper and unfolded it slowly. A crayon drawing. 3 figures standing in front of a building with Elena's written above the door. A woman with long brown hair, a small boy with a huge smile. And in the center, taller than both, a man in a black suit holding their hands. Above the man, in careful letters that had clearly taken a long time to write, were 3 words. "My Uncle Cory." Cory stared at the drawing. His jaw tightened, his throat worked, and for the first time in decades, longer than he could remember, his eyes glistened with something he refused to call tears. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I love it." The next morning, the drawing hung in a frame on the wall of his office in the Velvet Room. Centered, prominent, impossible to miss. A reminder that even monsters can be someone's hero.